Welcome back. It's time for Chapter 9 of Junior Blaze, Birth of a Hero. Don't forget you can go back and watch each chapter up until now, so you can catch up on the story, or you can catch up on my Facebook page at Junior Blaze 2020. Shout out to Chilled Cow for providing the music. Love that dude. He plays music all day to chill and relax to study to. He has music for you to sleep to. It's pretty sweet. So anyway, let's dive right in. Chapter 9. Castro Marshall peered down as his young son, Dietrich, struggled to straighten his tie. He smiled before kneeling and fixing the tie himself. He watched as his son skipped away cheerfully, not quite understanding the weight of the current moment. Dietrich was only 7 after all, and Castro just didn't think he was quite ready to carry the burdens and harshness of reality. He corralled his child and they climbed in the jet-black limo with the dark-tinted windows that was waiting for them in the driveway. Castro nodded to the driver to let him know they were ready. The limo pulled away from the small 2-bedroom house that Castro had settled in with his son and made the 45-minute drive to the cemetery. Castro's wife, Janice, had left the family just the previous year. He had become too obsessed, she had said. They had been growing apart, even before Dietrich had been born. She packed up and moved, and Castro didn't do much to stop her. He had to focus on the task at hand and now, raising a son alone. Dietrich didn't understand where his mother went, but Castro told him it was for the best. The status of their relationship made it more of a shock when Castro was greeted by Janice at the cemetery. "I heard about your father. I am so sorry," Janice said to Castro as he and Dietrich stepped out of the limo. She was short and petite, with short blonde hair and round facial features, exactly the way Castro remembered her. "Yes, thank you. He was a great man," Castro replied, face completely devoid of expression. The three of them walked in silence through the vast and hilly graveyard until they arrived at a large mausoleum. Inside was a priest, standing in front of the tomb of Bruce Marshall. They were the only 4 in attendance, and the service was short and sweet. There wasn't much to say about Bruce. He was a widower who had spent his entire adult life chasing the Stevens. As they departed, Janice hugged Dietrich tightly. Castro looked on, but he was fidgety and pacing and seemed anxious to leave. "Live a full life, son," she whispered in Dietrich's ear. "Don't let this life consume you." Dietrich looked confused as his father pulled him away abruptly and they departed. This was the last time he saw his mother, and those were the last words she spoke to him. Castro told him there was work to be done and they had no time for any further distractions, and work they did. Castro introduced young Dietrich to the family crusade shortly thereafter. He brought him into his workshop and taught him to build and use weapons and other tools to help achieve the goal. By the time Dietrich was a teen, Castro asked him for new ideas and inventions, and before long, Dietrich was coming up with schemes of his own. By the time he was 20, he thought he had the perfect plot. Castro told Dietrich there were flaws, that certain aspects wouldn't work, but the young and ambitious Dietrich was blinded by his own ingenious, albeit naive, plan. When it failed spectacularly and Castro nearly died, Dietrich fell into a deep depression and separated himself from the entire situation. He attempted to reconnect with his mother, but was unsuccessful, and that only deepened his despair. It took years before he found balance in his life. He met and fell in love with Ashley, which gave him a renewed sense of hope. By the time his twins were born, Dietrich was a new man. Once Dietrich had become a successful entrepreneur, he reached out to his father. Castro had gotten older, more crazed and determined. He was way beyond obsessed, but Dietrich wasn't going to let his father slip into insanity alone. "Son, I need your help," Castro had said frantically into the phone. "I'm on to something big." "Just like old times?" Dietrich asked, remembering the events of their last plan. "Even better." "Father, anything for you." They arranged a meeting and Dietrich prepared for the trip. He had moved hundreds of miles away during his depression and had settled down in Tucson, Arizona. He chartered a flight in his private jet and made the 6-hour flight to Bridgeport, Alabama, his childhood home. He was filled with several different emotions upon his return: excitement, grief, joy, agony, just to name a few. The plane landed and Dietrich hailed a taxi and headed to the house. The town looked exactly as Dietrich remembered. The same generic houses on the same mismanaged lawns, the same liquor stores on the same street corners. Even the children riding bikes and playing in the parks reminded him of the kids he'd see from his house. Dietrich never spent any time with those other kids, however. He was otherwise occupied with his father's machinations. Dietrich arrived at the brick tri-level house at the center of the cul-de-sac where he had grown up. The houses on either side were in different stages of disrepair. Both were uninhabited, and the one on the left was condemned. Dietrich took a moment to reminisce as he strolled up the concrete steps to the front door of his childhood home. He rang the doorbell and was surprised by how quickly the door opened. "Don't just stand there looking foolish, boy," Castro snapped. "Get in here." "Nice to see you again too, Dad," Dietrich muttered. "Enough chattering. Now that you're here, we can get started. Come." Dietrich followed his father through the house and out into the garage. He noticed that his father had let the house fall almost completely into ruins. There were boxes filled with papers and other trash stacked nearly to the ceiling in every room. There were dirty dishes and laundry on every available surface, and the entire house reeked of sour milk and fungus. In the garage, there was more of the same hoarding tendencies, except for the workstation in the back. It was spotless, minus the recent debris from Castro's latest invention. It appeared to be a muzzle-loader shotgun, with a few very crude modifications. Dietrich carefully picked it up and began to inspect it. "Be careful with that, boy," Castro whisper shouted. "Well, what the hell is it?" Dietrich asked, setting it back on the table gingerly. "It's the last weapon we will ever need." "I'm going to need more details, Dad," Dietrich said as Castro picked the weapon up and turned towards his son. Dad?" "Get out the way now, boy." Castro aimed the weapon at the opposite side of the garage and pulled one of the 3 triggers located on the handle. A small pellet erupted from the barrel and landed silently behind a stack of boxes. A few moments later, a thick cloud of smoke rose from where the pellet had landed and quickly filled the room. "Don't worry, it's completely harmless. Just a distraction," Castro spoke, sensing the question forming in Dietrich's mind. "All right, good start. What else you got?" Dietrich asked, interest officially piqued. Castro smiled as he opened the roof vents to let the smoke dissipate. He once again aimed across the room, pulling the second trigger this time. A large chainmail net sprang from the secondary barrel located beneath the original. It clung to the wall like a web made by a mechanical spider. Dietrich approached the net to get a closer look. "Don't touch that!" Castro exclaimed. 100,000 volts. Enough to incapacitate 2 grown men. Or 1 Stevens. Both men laughed at this diabolical statement, and they both felt like nothing had changed between them at all. "So, Father, what does the final trigger do?" "Ah, that, my boy, is the coup de grace." With that, he pulled 2 solid iron pellets from his pocket. "An extra, just in case I miss. It's been a long time coming. I may get overzealous." "So we have the weapon, but what exactly is the plan?" "You think I would invite you all this way without a plan in place? Boy, please." Castro walked over to one of the boxes near the workstation and reached inside. He pulled out several sheets of paper that included blueprints of a house, maps, and various handwritten notes. "You've been hard at work, Father," Dietrich said, a smile creeping onto his face. "I always am," Castro replied with a grunt. "Let's get to work." They worked out a plan of attack and drew up a schematic. It was elaborate, yet simple enough to execute. They needed a few extra bodies to handle certain aspects of the plan, so they hired 2 goons recently released from the county jail, Cassidy and Butch. They weren't very bright, but they were large, strong, and willing to work for peanuts. On the day they had decided to enact their scheme, the planets all seemed to align. The intel that Castro had collected on Arthur Stevens was spot on. They made the 5-hour drive north to a rural town in southern Tennessee known as Hunter's Valley. It was an incredibly small village, barely peaking at 300 residents. There were 2 traffic lights, one on the way into town and one on the way out. There was 1 gas station and 1 grocery store located in the downtown area. The townfolk were ecstatic when talk of a mini mall started to circulate. The 4 men staked out the house until dusk. It was a small yet homely shack, completely off the beaten path and suitably hidden from any nearby residents of the town. It was nearly Thanksgiving, and although the Stevens home was miles away from civilization, that didn't mean they weren't in a festive spirit. Their house was adorned with decorations of pumpkins and turkeys. There was even a wreath on the front door of a turkey dressed as a pilgrim. Cassidy, Butch, you two make your way around back. Find a way in. We want to catch him by surprise and box him in, Castro said in quiet excitement. Yes, boss, they replied in unison. Dietrich and I will take the weapon in the front. Once we make contact, you two block the exits, and we will finish what we came here to do, Castro exclaimed. Dietrich smiled to himself slightly at this. It was the first time his father had used his name since he had come back. The four of them split up, and the Marshalls crept to the front of the house. As expected, the front door was locked. Dietrich wandered off to check the windows while Castro searched for something to quietly break in with. The windows were also locked, but Castro waved wildly to his son. He had found a key hidden in a fake rock next to the front porch. They opened the door and made their way inside without hardly making a sound. They stalked around slowly, trying to familiarize themselves with the surrounding decor. There wasn't much inside, from what they could tell. One love seat and a coffee table were all that adorned the living room, plus a few potted plants and framed pictures that were hard to see due to the darkness of the evening. Dietrich started to mention something about night vision goggles to his father when his foot caught on one of the plants, and he fell in the direction of the coffee table. He twisted and turned and tried to fall as silently as possible, but still landed with a loud thud. The sound of glass shattering and wood splintering rang throughout the entire house, from the back door in the next room. Thinking the target was making an escape, Castro ran towards the noise, weapon ready in his hands. Dietrich, still picking himself off the floor, watched as Castro turned the corner and fired the electric netting into the kitchen. Dietrich sprang to his feet and joined his father in the kitchen entrance. He was ready to leap into action if the situation called for it, but the look on Castro's face made him hesitate. He followed his father's gaze to the corner of the room where the net had been fired. Still convulsing from the electrical current and pinned to the wall were Cassidy and Butch. Before Castro could admonish his two hired goons, he was pushed violently into Dietrich and both men fell to the floor. They turned over just in time to see Arthur Stevens and a woman they assumed to be his wife make a mad dash down the hallway. Dietrich scooped up the weapon that had fallen when they were shoved, stepped into the hallway, and fired the smoke pellet. The hall immediately filled with a thick, billowing cloud of smoke that quickly spread throughout the house. They decided to split up and each search one of the two bedrooms at the end of the hall. Castro took the master bedroom, while Dietrich inspected the guest room. The smoke was still heavy in the air, obstructing his view, but Dietrich was able to make out a futon and a dresser in the room. He cautiously crept around the room, checking the closet to no avail. He knelt on the ground to feel around under the futon when he heard a shout and the sounds of a struggle from across the hall. Once again, he sprang to his feet and ran to his father's aid. He arrived just in time to hear the sickening sound of snapping bone and the thud of dead weight hitting the ground. He felt bodies rush by him as he looked down at his father, laying lifeless on the bedroom floor. In a complete state of shock, he reached into Castro's jacket pocket for the ammo that would end the battle. In an almost robotic fashion, he loaded the final two pellets and began to pursue the Stevens as they made a dash to the front door. They had grabbed luggage, most likely an emergency plan for situations like this, and were distracted as Dietrich rounded the corner. He took aim directly at the back of Arthur's head and pulled the trigger, never breaking stride. Cadence, Arthur's wife, caught a glimpse of Dietrich out the corner of her eye. Without hesitating, she threw herself at Arthur, pushing him out the picture window next to the front door and taking the full blast from Dietrich's gun. She was dead before she hit the ground, and Arthur was unable to go back for her. By the time Dietrich made it outside to continue his pursuit, Arthur had already leapt away. Dietrich walked back in the house and lit a few candles near his father. He quietly recited the eulogy from his mother's funeral many years prior. He then made his way to the kitchen and turned on all the burners on the gas stove and opened the oven. He struck one final match as he exited the house. He had hoped in the back of his mind that the resulting fireball would kill him, but he escaped unscathed. Dietrich awoke suddenly in a cold sweat and tears streaking his face. He had had that nightmare memory again. He swore to himself under his breath. This would be the last time his father's death haunted his dreams. And that's the end of Chapter 9, Junior Blaze, Birth of a Hero. Don't forget, check me out on Facebook, and I'll holler at you people next week. Peace out.